Hey there guys, Portal Master here, and welcome back to another episode of A Brief History of Toys to Life. We are breaking down the Toys to Life games in the order which they were released. So we just got through with the Disney Infinity one, and if you're interested in that, you should definitely go check that out. But today, we're going to be diving into A Brief History of Amiibo. This one, like I said, cannot be as numbers heavy because the numbers data just isn't out there. We don't know how many of every Amiibo sold, so it's really hard to really track the long-term success of Amiibo or actually directly compare it to things like Skylanders or Disney Infinity. The one thing we do know about Amiibo overall, numbers-wise, is that Link is the best-selling Amiibo of all time. The original Link was, or at least it was at one point, and that Amiibo sales have declined over time. And beyond that, we don't really know. But let's jump into giving you guys a brief history of what Amiibo is. Amiibo was introduced in November of 2014. It is the third major Toys to Life property to be created, following Skylanders in 2011 and Disney Infinity in 2013. Unlike other Toys to Life games, Amiibo was not, well, a game. It was a platform that allowed Nintendo to make Toys to Life figures that worked in multiple games. So essentially, if you bought into the Amiibo ecosystem, it was kind of, theorized that you would probably own a lot of Nintendo games and be able to get value out of your Amiibo for years to come as new Amiibo compatible games came out. Despite that, the flagship Amiibo game definitely was Smash 4, which is the Smash Brothers game that was released for the Wii U, although it definitely has now evolved into Smash Ultimate, which is, the Nintendo Switch version. That would probably now be considered the flagship Amiibo game, but definitely understand there was no single game for Amiibo. Amiibos did different things depending on the game. Some games they had purely cosmetic effects, and in other games they had much more tangible effects that actually changed the way you played the game, but a lot of other games did have largely cosmetic implementation. That is one of the things about Amiibo, is that sometimes it felt like you really didn't get your money's worth, but other times you were like, okay, yeah, this is actually kind of cool. The Amiibos that were released retailed for $13, with certain exceptions. A few Amiibos were more. There were, of course, double and triple packs that were released later on, but the standard pricing for an Amiibo when they first came out was definitely $13. The figures were probably about the same size as a Skylanders character. They may have been a little bit larger than the original characters. They definitely didn't have as much theming as Skylanders did. Honestly, they're probably more comparable in terms of quality to the Disney Infinity characters. Amiibo contained multiple different series. The main flagship series was the Smash Brothers series, and this is what most of the Amiibos fell into. This is any Amiibo that worked in Smash Bros. By and large. The other Amiibos that were released, there was like a Splatoon series, because the Splatoon Amiibos did not do anything with Smash, so they were released with a different base color. There were Animal Crossing Amiibos. Later on, there were Yoshi plushie Amiibos. There are also Amiibo cards. The vast majority of Amiibos that we'll be talking about in this particular video are the Smash Bros. Amiibo set, but definitely keep in mind that there were other series of Amiibo that did not work with Smash Bros, and they were later on not sold as much, and that is partly due to declining sales of Amiibo, which we will get into later on. Who did Amiibo appeal to? See, that's an interesting question. Amiibo definitely had a wider appeal than Skylanders, but a narrower appeal than, say, Disney Infinity. Drawing from the rich history of Nintendo IPs, Amiibo had a lot to work with, but definitely not the same broad-scale appeal that Disney Infinity had, as every single Amiibo character was a video game character, not like a entertainment character that had been a beloved, fiction icon for years. So again, much more constrained than Disney Infinity, but still probably wider than Skylanders did, especially being not an original character. The Amiibos were based on pre-existing characters. One thing that did constrain the audience of Amiibo overall compared to the other Toys to Life games is the fact that it was exclusive to Nintendo platforms. So at the time, you could only use Amiibos with the Wii U and with the 3DS. Nowadays, they're pretty much only, working with Switch games because there's nothing coming out for the Wii U or the 3DS anymore. In terms of sales of particular characters, it is very, very difficult to actually say. I mentioned this earlier. The rarity of these various amiibos varied wildly. Some of them were very common and some of them were very rare. So just saying, oh, well, there were, a crap ton of Sonic amiibos at the store doesn't necessarily mean that Sonic didn't sell well. It means that they were overstocked. I kind of think if you're familiar with Skylanders, what happened with Boomer? Boomer was a very popular character at first in terms of stocking. There were a ton of Boomers stocked in stores. But then after Christmas came, Boomer did not sell at all, whether it be from overstocking or be it from just not, being liked, and essentially, he eventually ended up being rare. This isn't exactly what's happened with Amiibo characters, but it definitely is sort of an analogy if you're more familiar with Skylanders. Amiibo never faced direct competition. There's never been any type of, competitor to Amiibo. Skylanders, Disney Infinity, and Dimensions definitely were other Toys to Life games, but I don't think that they were ever competitors, just because they were so vastly different. At one point, Sony was revealing their own line of collectible figures featuring various iconic video game characters. It was called Tataku, but this was not a Toys to Life franchise. It was just collectible items, and it never really competed with Amiibo. When Splatoon launched, it launched with its own series of amiibos. We don't really see that anymore, be that from limited sales or just Nintendo not really wanting to go that route anymore. I personally think that by creating amiibos that only worked in some games and not all games, Nintendo really shot themselves in the foot in terms of collectible aspects. I mean, for instance, if you have Splatoon amiibos and you sell 1 million copies of Splatoon, you've limited yourself in terms of the potential audience to just the 1 million people that bought Splatoon, or the hardcore amiibo collectors that don't necessarily buy Splatoon. Compare that to something like a Zelda amiibo that would have been released, hypothetically speaking, for Breath of the Wild, which we've seen, like with the Champion amiibos for Breath of the Wild. They're actually being restocked. We'll talk about that in a second. But basically, they had a much wider appeal. And I think Nintendo quickly learned that for some games, you just can't do an amiibo series. It isn't popular enough to justify printing an entire line of toys. With the exception of the re-release of the Breath of the Wild amiibos, there have been no other amiibo series made in quite some time. It's strictly been the original Smash Bros. Characters that have been coming out, and the ones, of course, for the DLC for Ultimate have been coming out as well. It's definitely become a little more constrained, with the single exception of amiibo cards, which have seen a lot of success due to the success of, Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing is essentially carrying these amiibo cards right now. They are doing insanely well. They are almost impossible to get, and it sort of shows how Nintendo is still exploring different options with Toys to Life, if you can still consider that Toys to Life, but are not necessarily following the traditional model that we once knew Toys to Life to follow. If you ask me, Nintendo is still playing around a lot with Amiibo. They've learned what does and what doesn't work, and they do understand that they can make a collectible series of Amiibos still work. Personally, I think that what they're doing with re-releasing the Champions from Breath of the Wild is a litmus test to see if re-releasing Amiibos is an effective strategy, and if non-main series Amiibos will still sell. I think that that's the purpose of doing so, especially coinciding with the launch of Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. I think that that is where this is going. This video is going to be a little different from a lot of the other Toys to Life series that I talk about, because this series is not dead. Amiibo is still going on, so there's a lot more room for speculation on where the series could still go from here. We've got to get into sales now, which is by far, this is going to be the most analytical portion of the video, but I'll still try to keep it brief. I've got my phone pulled up here because I don't have a lot of this information memorized, and I want to thank Sub-Zero once again for helping me compile a lot of this data. So we're going to be talking about waves 1 through 9 for Amiibo. This is the main points, the main data you need for me to be able to make my point. So let's talk about stocking. So of the first wave that was released, you had several rare characters, the Wii Fit Trainer, Marth, and Villager. These guys were extremely rare, and it already highlights the problem with stocking right out of the gate. These problems really didn't get fixed later on, and if you ask me, one of the biggest reasons that Nintendo made this mistake early on was they followed the Skylanders model of stocking as opposed to the Disney Infinity model of stocking. Skylanders was stocked in a wave fashion, and yes, Amiibo did release in a wave, and so did Infinity, but basically what Skylanders would do is they would ship you a box labeled Wave 3, and and every Wave 3 box would contain the same Skylanders. It would contain, I don't know, two of these, and then of the other 4 left, it'd contain like one of all those Skylanders. And so, essentially, if a particular Skylander was extremely popular, it was very difficult to restock them. My understanding is that Amiibos did the same thing, and it was very difficult to get your hands on some of the rarer Amiibos because of this reason. You could not directly order Amiibos, and if you could, they were very, very limited in stock. This could have been fixed early, and Nintendo did not fix it early. Their only solution was to shrink the wave sizes later on. Once Wave 2 came out, there were still several problems. Captain Falcon, Little Mac, and Pit were all released, and among the other characters, they were the hardest to get. They were pretty difficult to find for quite some time. In Wave 3, that's where we really see the disaster coming in for Amiibo. Rosalina was exclusive to Target. I don't think that was too much a fiasco, but all the others were insanely difficult to get in the US. These were Lucario, Ike, Shulk, Meta Knight, Mega Man, and King Dedede. These were all incredibly difficult to get, and in most Amiibo fans' opinion, this is really where things started to go bad for Nintendo. I think a lot of people feel as if sales dropped after this because people got so annoyed with Nintendo's stocking issues. Wave 4 had Ness, a GameStop exclusive. It actually crashed GameStop's website. Then you had Lucina, Robin, and Jigglypuff all become fairly rare. Eventually they did get more common, but at first they were definitely rare. Wave 5 wasn't bad, but it just had 2 characters. They shrunk the waves and that kind of fixed the problem, but at the expense of releasing a ton of different characters. Wave 6 started to solve some of the issues, but, still, at first, Ganondorf and Olimar were pretty common, but then they didn't get restocked. And then you had the Rob, Duck Hunt, and Mr. Game & Watch 3-pack that was GameStop exclusive that was insanely difficult to find. Wave 7 also wasn't too bad. It had a very small release, though. Wave 8, all it had was Lucas, and from there on out, they did seem to solve some of their issues, but again, it was by shrinking the wave sizes, not by fixing the actual underlying problems. I think ultimately the stocking issues really damaged Amiibo's reputation. Amiibo was advertised as a collectible, whereas Skylanders and Disney Infinity were not as heavily marketed as such. They were marketed as games that you needed figures to play as. Amiibo was a very, very desirable collectible from the get-go. Nintendo failed to consider that and failed to, get the correct supply chains in place to make sure that the stocking issues were not as big of a problem as they were. I think this damaged the brand irreparably, as players couldn't get the Amiibos they wanted, and when they missed out on a few Amiibos, they were like, you know what? I don't really want to collect Amiibos anymore. I missed, Robin, I missed Lucina, I missed Ganondorf. I don't want to pay $50 to buy them online. I'm just going to stop collecting them. And even though some of them did eventually become more easy to get later, they were restocked later on, it still damaged the reputation of the brand, and they'd already given up at that point. I think that over time, all of Nintendo's blunders with Amiibo cost them customers slowly but surely. I, for one, would like to buy some Amiibos someday, but I also don't really want to because I know it's difficult to get Amiibos. I probably could never get a full collection of Amiibos for anything close to a reasonable price because they just didn't make that a possibility, and turning off so many casual collectors really did them so much harm. Despite all of the rapid decreases of Amiibo sales, Nintendo's still hanging on. They still see the need to continue selling Amiibos. They are still releasing the new ones for the Smash DLC characters, and Amiibo cards are doing fantastic right now. And they're even exploring a possibility of adding more Amiibo functionality according to certain patents that have been discovered. I will link that video down in the description below if you'd like to go check that one out. Amiibo's a bit of a strange one. It's always been a kind of an ugly duckling, always there, but never quite fitting in with the rest of the Toys to Life games. Somehow, though, it's outlasted every single other game. It's insane that Amiibo has still been able to cling on. They are probably the most successful in terms of toy sales just because of how difficult it is to get these things. These are collector's items, more so than they ever were toys, like with Skylanders. You can debate the differences, but I definitely class these much more as collector's items, and I think that that's why they've still been able able to hang on. There are still hardcore collectors that they can put out a new Amiibo, and they are guaranteed at a minimum a certain number of people will buy them, because that's how many hardcore collectors are still left. Of course, you have more casual fans, but I think they turned away a lot of the casual fans. I think luckily, though, they've been able to recoup a lot of them with the Amiibo cards. And going forward, it's going to be really interesting to see how they choose to continue the Amiibo brand, because personally, I don't think they're going to stop it anytime soon, so I am really curious where we go from here. This may be a brief history of Toys to Life video that does get revisited later on if something interesting winds up happening. I don't really know. I've still failed to make this video brief, so I want to thank you guys for sticking with me on this video. Next week, we will be looking at LEGO Dimensions. To sum things up for this video, I don't really have much to say because things aren't done. I know this probably seems like an abrupt ending, but really, I don't have more to say on Amiibo. It's just, it is what it is. It is still ongoing, and there you have it. It's also not as much of a game as some of the other franchises, so it's kind of hard for me to comment on it from a more gamery perspective, and it's so much easier to talk about it from the collector's perspective. Nonetheless, thank you so much for watching. I will be back, like I said, with another brief history of Toys to Life video next week just for you guys. Thank you so much. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Go check out all my links in the description to all my social medias and to the Discord, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks again for watching. I just wanted to take some time to thank my generous patrons on Patreon, including APYT Skylanders, OctoBoom, Haley, True Blue Dogemon, Cynder, HypnoticOcelot, Adrian, and AngryTedC.